Vladimir Putin just dropped a huge bombshell on what's next for Ukraine. We're going to see the latest high-level meeting he just had with his counterpart in Belarus. We're going to see what military experts expect to happen any minute now. And make sure to stick with me to the very end of this video when I'll reveal why even globalist liberals are signaling that it's time for NATO and the West to back off and negotiate a lasting peace. You are not going to want to miss this. Russian President Vladimir Putin took a rare visit to Belarus to meet with his counterpart, President Alexander Lukashenko. Both Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov as well as Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu were in Minsk ahead of Putin's arrival. This is all happening as Russian troops are holding training exercises inside Belarus, raising questions as to whether the Belarusian troops will officially join Russia in its military campaign against Ukraine. Now, big picture, my colleague Conrad Franz, who hosts the podcast World War Now, is noting that what we're seeing going on here between Russia and Belarus is part of a wider geopolitical relationship known as the Union States. So goes back to a treaty starting in 1997 where Lukashenko and then Russian President Boris Yeltsin signed a treaty establishing a union between the two states, Russia and Belarus. And then in 1999, they actually established themselves as a union state where they coordinate their economic and foreign policies, which many believe to be the precursor to a full reunification at some point in the next couple of decades. Now, like I said, this union state, this alliance goes back to Yeltsin, who ironically, of course, oversaw the dissolution of the Soviet Empire. But Yeltsin actually spent much of his time trying to rebuild alliances with former Soviet republics. He actively tried to create a commonwealth of independent states among the former republics there. And of course, Belarus and most particularly Ukraine were considered the two most important regions in that political renewal. Well, obviously, Belarus is fully tied to Russian economic and political interests. And now with the recent annexation of the 4 regions in eastern Ukraine to Russia, well, 5 if you include Crimea, now a significant portion of Ukraine has been absorbed into the rising Russian civilizational sphere. The newly emerging Russian world, that is the single greatest opponent to Western globalism on the planet, is now going to include Ukraine to at least some point. So what's going on here? Well, with these military drills that are happening in Belarus, it does appear that Russia is planning nothing less than what many believe to be the decisive death blow in this conflict. They brought in a new general, General Surovikin, who's been dubbed General Armageddon by the Russian media because of his propensity towards brutality in war. He's been brought in to send a clear message that a massive, utterly massive, no-holds-barred offensive is coming that will decisively end this conflict once and for all. And so when all is said and done, it looks like we're just waiting for General Surovikin to give the order to launch the attack. In the meantime, an unrelenting barrage of Russian missiles have been inflicting catastrophic damage to the basic infrastructure of Ukraine, both civilian and military. It's being widely reported that Ukrainian command and control is being utterly annihilated. Power grids are being destroyed, bridges, roads, the whole of transportation infrastructure. Even the mayor of Kiev is warning his citizens that they need to be prepared to leave. We're talking mass evacuations going westward because there's simply no guarantee that Russian offenses are not going to level the city. The Washington Post is admitting that the Ukrainian economy is in absolute ruins, and the fact that everyone is anticipating this massive strike from Russia, of course, is making things all the worse. Here's Colonel Doug McGregor on what he predicts next for the Russian offensive.
So I think you're going to see massive offensives on at least 2 or 3 axes with a couple of 100,000 troops on each one. We'll see what they do. They're going to cut off the Polish border from Kiev. So there'll be an enormous Russian force between the Polish border and Kiev. Wow. There'll be an enormous Russian force that encircles and cuts off and destroys what's left of the Ukrainian forces in the south. They'll come up from the south.
This is almost a vice or a pincer movement with Kiev in the middle.
Yeah. The last thing that they'll do is deal with Kyiv. They want to annihilate the Ukrainian army. They talked about denazification for a long time. They're not going to rest until all of these Nazi formations that everyone apologizes for in the West are gone. And once they're gone, then they'll turn their attention to Kyiv. Now, there is concern, growing concern in Moscow, that we would be foolish enough to take this 90,000-man coalition of the willing and try to rush into some part of Western Ukraine as the liberator or savior of what's left of Ukraine. And their assumption is that the Russians won't fight them. Well, the Russians obviously don't want a confrontation with us, but depending on how we do this and how far we're willing to go, we could end up losing those troops to enormous military power directed against them. We don't have the replacements. We don't have the fuel. We don't have the repair parts. We don't even have the ammunition anymore because we've given it all to Ukraine. And we're on our own. Poles, a few Romanians, and us. The rest of NATO is not interested in marching eastward into Russia. So it's a dangerous situation. They're aware of it. And that's another reason why they fear that if they do end up in a confrontation with us and they utterly destroy our force on the ground, that we will then turn to the use of nuclear weapons. That's the concern.
Now, that last part is obviously key here. Putin has been talking a lot about the use of nuclear weapons in this conflict. And what he just had to say a few days back is very insightful into what's happening. You're not going to want to miss it. But first, make sure to click on that link below and protect yourself and your family from all of this economic insanity with the timeless value of gold and silver. As you know, patriots of the centuries have always relied on gold and silver to protect their assets during economic storms. And that is where the amazing patriots over at Goldco come in. If you have $50,000 or more in an IRA, 401k, or savings account, you need to protect those assets from bumbling Biden's insanity with timeless value of gold and silver. Click on that link below and talk to our very good friends over at Goldco. They're one of us, gang. They're patriots, and they want you to succeed so much. They're offering up to $10,000 in free silver if you open up an account with them. But that is a limited time offer, so don't wait. Click on that link below or visit my special website, turleytalkslikesgold.com.
In the United States, there is this theory, strategy, doctrine even of preemptive strike. We don't have it in our strategy. Our strategy stipulates a return strike because it's not a secret to anyone. What is a return strike? So we are returning the strike, replying our systems when they see that the missiles were launched. If we see it, then we reply, because we hold exercises of our nuclear forces. We are not hiding that. We are not concealing that. We are informing all the nuclear powers, the United States. We are informing them that we are holding these kind of exercises. They are doing the same. And as soon as we receive the signal about the missile strike, we launch hundreds of our missiles, and it would be impossible to stop them, but that would be a reply, a response. What does it mean? That when the enemy warheads would fall on the Russian Federation, it will happen one way or another. There is no way to avoid that. But nothing would remain from the enemy, would be eliminated, because it's impossible to stop hundreds of missiles, and it stopped them from doing that. But if a potential enemy believes that it would be possible to use the theory, the doctrine of preemptive strike, and we are not considering this option, it makes us think about the threats that are created, that are posed by these kinds of ideas in the defense doctrines of other countries.
So there you go. There you have it. I mean, that was classic, standard, mad policy, mutually assured destruction. But clearly the Russians are very concerned that NATO powers are the ones who will end up striking first. And this is because no matter what Russia does, annexation, cutting off the gas and fuel to Europe, destroying Ukrainian troops and NATO equipment, even chest thumping its own nuclear arsenal, no matter what Russia does, all Western powers do, particularly in DC and in London, all they do is double down on Ukraine. And note, it's not just making sure Russia leaves Ukraine. It's about destroying Russia in the process. It's about regime change and overthrowing Putin like he's some third world despot. I've even heard people talking about, chopping Russia up into pieces like at the end of the Cold War, the 5 separate nations and some insanity like that. This rhetoric is insane when directed towards the single most powerful nuclear nation on the planet, a nation that has made it clearer that the world would be annihilated before anything like that were even to come close to happening. So that's why globalist figureheads like Henry Kissinger, of all people, are coming out and saying, guys, the jig is up. It's time for a negotiated peace because you Western powers, you keep going down this trail and nobody blinks, the global consequence could be utterly catastrophic. So obviously we'll be keeping a very close eye on how things develop here. But it does appear very clear that Russia is going to launch a massive offensive, almost certainly from the north via Belarus, with several 100,000 troops aimed to do one thing and one thing only, and that is bring a decisive end to this horrific and tragic event. As always, make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. You'll definitely want to check out my latest video on Kari Lake promising to burn the whole corrupt system down. You're going to absolutely love it, so make sure to click on that link, and I'll see you over there. God bless.